Our next session is one of the most eagerly awaited sessions of this conference, where we learn from the masters. Chairing this session will be Dr. Robin Chakraborty, Dr. Debabrata Roy, Dr. P.K. Deb, Dr. M.K. Dash, and Dr. Sukumar Ghosh. Moderating this session will be Dr. Dilip Kumar, and the expert panelists include Dr. Rajiv Krishna, Dr. Abhinav Bhagat, and Dr. Shobhashachi Paul. May I please request the chairpersons and the moderator, Dr. Dilip Kumar, to start the proceedings for this session.
Dilip is actually busy in the meeting in the other hall. So I think chairpersons may take this session forward. Chairperson, sir, can you start?
Hello. I think hello, Dr.
Minal, you can start. Minal, you start.
Okay.
Yeah, Dr. Chakraborty is here. Okay, okay. I think without wasting much time, let's go to the speaker because we have already lost so much of time earlier. So let me call upon Dr. Rajneesh Kapoor to present his deliberation on complex TAVI. Dr. Kapoor, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. So am I audible, loud and clear?
Yes, sir. Perfect.
So thank you. So clearly, Bengal is leading the way. So all the dynamicity which has happened in the last few days, everybody has seen. And hats off to all the team in Bengal sitting and managing this. So my privilege to be here presenting a very complex case of aortic stenosis where I have done TAVI. This has been done about a month back. So there were a few things which I thought would be good enough sharing in this platform. It's good teaching case. So I thought I'll share in this forum. Thank you very much giving me this chance. So treating a critical aortic stenosis with extensive LVOT calcium. So now I'll come straight to my case. This is a 71-year-old male patient, had a prior history of MI. He was diabetic and hypertensive and a critical aortic stenosis, obviously, and was quite symptomatic. And then along with there was mild mitral regurgitation, STS score of 4%, and tricuspid aortic valve with moderate calcium on the aortic valve. But the main problem was the annular calcium and a severe LVOT calcium. So that was something which needs to be discussed here, and how to strategize those guys who are doing TAVR in certain situations where there is not only an annular calcification, but especially if it engulfs into the LVOT. The aorta was a bit tortuous. So these were the parameters. The mean pressure gradient across the aortic valve was 50 millimeter of mercury, and the AVA was 0.6 with moderate AR and mild MR and EF of 45%. So these were the patient characteristics. And this is the graphics. It clearly depicts that coronary osteal height was not an issue at all. On the left side, it was 19, and on the right side, it was 18. So quite spacious. So height was very good. Now let's come to the annulus. The perimeter derived aortic annulus was 21.7 millimeter and area derived was 21.2. So this was the annular parameters, and sinus of Valsalva was again relatively okay. The femoral's accessibility was fine, but the main issue is here. Now, if we see at the LVOT level, just below the aortic valve, so this is at this level, the level is just below the annulus, you can see there are two big nodules extending into the LVOT. So these are the big calcified chunks, entering into the LVOT. And once we see this on CT, I think our scares and concerns are very high how to deal with this case. And normal thing which comes to our mind to strategize this case is to use self-expanding valves, the Medtronic valve, rather than balloon expanding valves. Because if we use balloon expanding valves, there are more chances of annular rupture or this calcium impinging into the LVOT and creating a rupture. So that was one concern here. And see this calcification, the annulus calcification, and a deep chunk is going into the LVOT. So this is one CT segment which gives us big concerns while we are planning such case. See this. Again, it's very clearly discernible that there is a big chunk of calcium here. This is a tricuspid valve. That there's good amount of calcium here, but main concern is the annulus and the LVOT calcium. Now, normally, once we have to select a size of the valve, we usually go upsize for the valve by 15% or maybe 20% at times. But the big thing which we have to keep in mind that while we are dealing with extensive calcification and especially the LVOT calcium, the upsize should be only 0 to 5%, not beyond 5%. We should not try overstretching the annulus beyond 5% because that will increase the chances of rupture. Now, in this case, the area was 354 millimeter square, and somehow by default, our choice was my valve because of financial issues, the Merrill valve. Now, the good point about my valve is that it comes with lots of sizes. There are intermediate sizes available also. So 21.5 millimeter was the size which we selected, and it was only 2.5% oversized. So this is, again, I'm emphasizing, don't go beyond 5% oversize. The femorals were fine, no issues. This is the procedure, the aortogram. See that there is a lot of calcium. The valve crossed and pre-dilated with 16. Now, this is again question why we chose 16. Now, if we see that CT, if we exclude that calcium, we have to pick and choose the pre-dilating balloon size based on the rest of the size of LVOT and excluding that calcium chunk. So this is also very important. This is the valve being positioned almost 30-70, 30 into LVOT, and it's being deployed here. Valve deployed here. See, it's very well deployed. Again, almost 20-80 ratio, 20 into LVOT and 80% above. This is on echo. This looks good. And after the deployment, the parameters were very gratifying. The mean gradient was 6 millimeter mercury only, and EF was same. So it settled in well. The valve settled in well. But I'm trying to give a message here. So normally with LVOT extensive calcification, our pick and choose valve is self-expanding. I'm not giving a message that this should be balloon expanding. I am giving a message that balloon expanding can be considered. It's relatively safe. Only thing is we should be really analyzing it properly, and planning should be meticulous about the sizes. The one big tip which I have discussed, don't oversize it too much. Another tip which I have discussed, if you have to pre-dilate the balloon, which you should, seeing the calcification, the size of the balloon should not be beyond the length, beyond the diameter of that part, excluding that calcium. So it should not be impinging, it should not be pressurizing that calcium zone into the LVOT or into the annulus. So this is quite a safe modality. It can be considered, it can be done. The data is still not with us. Yesterday also I was presenting this case where Dr. Patrick Sares was also there in the meeting. So I think it is fairly, doable with this balloon expanding valves also, but carrying a high degree of caution and high degree of planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Rajnish Kapoor, for your beautiful presentation on a very complex case. In fact, a newer dimension has been added to the TAVR, where annular calcification again has become a thorn in the whole procedure. So if there are any comments from other chairpersons, Dr. Anjanlal Datta, Dr. Robin Chakraborty and others.
Yeah, just a quick comment, Rajesh. I think it's a good presentation. I think you touched that point that take-home message should not be that in a calcified aortic annulus, as well as especially LVOT calcification, if calcification is more within 4 millimeter below the aortic valve, the valve of choice is balloon expandable. It is usually self-expandable. That should be very clear, although this is an exceptional case. That is one. Second is the other point which you did not touch upon. What was the electro ECG like? And sort of, if you really select balloon expandable valve in such a situation, what are the chances of having conduction disorders like complete heart block?
Yeah. So that's what I was also saying, that I am not giving a message that this should be the choice, but at times we may come across situations where we have to use this. Then these are the tips, and more the data procured, more better we become wiser. But yes, as far as conduction disturbance is concerned, again, we are not upsizing the valve. The upsizing is very small. So the pressure on the conduction system is again going to be lesser. So I'm not saying that there is absolute chance that nothing would happen. Conduction disturbances can happen, but lesser chance because we are just 2.5% upsizing as compared to the annular diameter.
Sure, but I think at the same time, one should remember that if the patient has a bifascicular block and history of syncope, and you've got a calcified aortic valve, one really has to be extra careful of considering a balloon expandable TAVR.
Absolutely. And keep it as shallow as possible if you are using balloon expandable. So these are
Thank you, Dr. Rajneesh. And in the interest of the time, let us request our next speaker, Dr. R.D. Yadav, LMCA trifurcation mini cross with triple case. R.D. Dada.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity. So I am going to show you the case. This is a male 52-year presented with unstable angina, TROP-T positive, suggestive of NSTMI. He was a smoker, non-diabetic, non-hypertensive, lipid level, high lipid level without family history of coronary artery disease. Echo showed LV ejection fraction 45% with interval hypokinesia. CAG showed, I will show the trifurcation. RCA was normal, and this is the complex lesion. So what? So this is the epicranial view. This is the epicaudal view. This is aleocaudal view. You can see the complex distal bifurcation, trifurcation. So how to approach this? I use the right coronary is normal, but not that big. So just a minute. So cross the LAD and LCX dilated sequentially, and Ramus I didn't put wire, but if it could have been more blocked, then I could have put a wire from the second guide. So put the mini cross technique, simple mini cross technique, and mini cross. If you want to preserve a vessel, put mini cross technique. And so did the stenting of the circumflex. Then the crossed with the another stent in the LAD to left main to LAD. So then did the pot, and then after pot we recrossed the circumflex, so the stent starts of the LAD, and then put two guide, put the another wire into the ramus, is sequentially dilated, struts become dilated, and then did again pot, and then did the triple kiss with the two guide technique. This is I feel much more comfortable. And then after triple kiss, then pot, this is pot, and after the pot, this is the almost final result. In ramus I didn't put a stent because it was not that significantly diseased. So if I have to put a stent in the ramus because of dissection or so, I will do the tap technique. So this is this is a aleocaudal view. So this is looking all the better. So so the message is that LMC trifurcation is a relatively rare disease. Around 10% of all the left men with large area of myocardium at risk. Technically, PCI of LMCA trifurcation is difficult, but either mini cross or decay cross or mini clot is my technique, which I'm not going to show because of lack of time. If LV systolic function is near normal, then there is no need of IBP support or any hemodynamic support. Two guide technique I found is very easy to use for triple kiss. And if you see the your classification, Medina has classified this triple, that is by trifurcation, one for leftman, one for LED, 0-1 or 0-1 for LCX and 0-1 for Ramus. So this is the classifications they have given, and 2/3 of their each sizes of the blood vessel has been taken as a size of the leftman approximately, and this Murray's law they have taken, and this is a classification given by the same Medina, that is type A where leftman is involved, type B where branches are involved. So this is the classification, and distal leftman is 1, 2 is main branch, that is LED, and 3 is circumflex, and 4 is the your ostial ramus. So this is the way they have classified. Okay, so I'm not going to go detail about this. You have to decide the technique depending on the plaque distribution, location, severity, angulation, tortuosity, calcification, and size discrepancy. And the technique which I will show you is like this. How to do is just in sequence, put all the 3 wire in all the vessels, sequentially dilate all the vessels. Use 2 guide. I found very comfortable. For the ramus, I use 2nd guide, and put the stent into the ramus, cross with the LED to LMCA balloon, and that is step cross, and you then use the circumflex stent, cross with the same cross with the your LMCA to LED stent, and then put the your LMCA to LED stent, and then recross 3, and then do the kissing balloon with the 2 guide. And the technique which I have shown already is a standard technique. So procedural leftman trifurcation, things to remember from this is complex leftman lesions is strategic game. You have to know what to do. High pressure balloon and complication if occurs, be calm and do like this. It requires a good technique and good knowledge. And I'm not showing the mini culotte. I have just showed the mini crus, which is most easily done. No vessel will be closed if you will use the mini crus. And thank you. I'm ready to answer any question.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Jadhav. That's a very good technique. This is Dr. Roy, Devabrata Roy from Kolkata. And do you think there should be some criteria regarding the angle, bifurcation angle, that is that should be necessary to take this approach for trifurcation stenting?
What I want to say, if you want to do a technique, because the angle will be less between each blood vessels, it's not like 90 degree and you will be good. So the best way is to do either mini crus or you do mini culotte, or which is my favorite technique, another triple vessel, again another trifurcation which I am not going to show because of lack of time. And then or decay crus also you can do, and the main ramus you can do the tap technique, or you can crus, which I showed the technique mini crus, you do like that, step crus, what is called step crus.
And your opinion regarding double side branch protection technique?
Yeah, if you want protection of the ramus, then you put another guiding, and from that guide you put the wire to ramus, and then do the sequential dilatation and put the stent first ramus, cross with the LMCA to LED balloon, and then take the circumflex stent, cross with the LMCA to LED balloon, and then go the stent with the LMCA to LED and put the stent, and then before putting the stent, take out the wire from both the vessels, ramus and circumflex, and then recross the circumflex by the LED guiding, and another guide you use for the ramus, and do the kissing, triple kiss.
Thank you, Dr. Jadhav.
Dr. Jadhav, it was a very good case, but I was wondering, are you happy without any IVAS?
Actually, this is the place where I did is there was no IVAS available. That doesn't mean that you cannot do a procedure.
No, it's well done. Most of our centers in India use IVAS in a very small number of cases because of financial constraint, because of logistics problems. But even then, it was done wonderful. and apparently it looks very good. It cannot be done better than that.
Done more than 2 years now. This patient is fine, and he's not having any symptoms at the present moment.
Dr.
Clinically,
Jadhav, you had no problem in crossing into the stains, side branch stains with the balloons before doing the final kissing, isn't it?
yeah.
So that you had no
It is
problem in
related to
crossing the side bench stains before doing the final kissing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is poor man's IVUS. So may I call upon now Professor Smith Srivastav to start his deliberation on laser in complex PCI.
Thank you, Dr. Roy, and it's a honor and a pleasure for me to be here. This is a new introduction to India, and we were the first one to do a officially first case of laser in India. And what I'll be sharing today is not, the things have become simple. They're not that complex as Dr. Jadhav has just presented, but how they have become simple, that is what I'm would be presenting here. A brief introduction, like angioplasty, what we do is just a plastic deformation of the obstructive plaque. We but we do not ablate the plaque. The plaque ablation can be achieved only by either directional atherectomy, rotational atherectomy, and now laser catheter ablation. How this makes a difference is because it has multiple ways of acting. It has photochemical, thermo, and mechanical actions which can bring down, and on added to that, it has beneficial effects on platelet aggregation. So that also helps us in some thrombus resolution and some thrombus dissolution. Mechanisms probably we are all aware, so I'll leave that part, and I'll come to the basic indications where a laser coronary atherectomy is indicated. It is to start with, one is their elite indications. One is undilatable lesions or uncrossable lesions, either by wire or by a balloon, or in chronic total occlusions where the lesions are uncrossable. If there is a long diffuse atherosclerotic lesions, if it's a instant restenosis because of neointimal formation, not because of a prolapse of the studs. In prolapse also, there are indications where laser with dye has been tried, and because it creates kind of a blast that can open up the collapse stent. Ostial or bifurcation lesions, and another elite indication is a primary PCI where there is large thrombus burden and we want to ablate the thrombus. So our first case was ELCA, which was in a non-crossable CTO. It was a smoker patient, diabetic, hypertensive patient who already had a CVA, and he was done angiography outside where it revealed triple vessel disease, advised bypass, but he was not ready for a bypass, and he came to us with a right-sided CTO, and we tried to cross balloon, but it was crossable with a wire. It could be tracked with a wire, but it did not allow the balloon to be passed. And here again, we used a laser coronary catheter of 0.9 and 3 cycles of 45 fluctuants with 25 pulses each. And we see that the life becomes very easy. It gives way very easily, and now the balloon could be passed, and a stent distal and proximally could be placed easily. The same patient had undergone plasty to the left side also. I'll skip these for sake of time. And the next patient is when again we tried to open up the artery, trying to cross with an open NC, but it was a mildly calcified lesion and it did not allow an open NC balloon to cross. And we failed on our first attempt because the balloon did not cross, or it did not allow any dilatation. Here again, it was very easy. Once the wire was crossed, it was very easy to cross the laser catheter. Again, 2 laser catheters, 0.9 as well as 1.4 were used, and at different fluctuants of 45 and 60, and around 6 and 2 cycles were used for these patients. For this patient, and then it allowed a open NC to get in and inflate very well, and then again to stent to put a 2 long stents into this patient easily. So this is the final result. Another indication where we have used laser coronary atherectomy is in-stent restenosis. This is a patient, a doctor patient who's a surgeon himself. He was done angioplasty with tetra stent in 2001 to LAD, and now he came with angina on exertion class 3 with a good ejection fraction, and he has some disease in the OM, but again, the ISR in the proximal LAD did not allow any balloon to cross. Again, a laser catheter with was applied here with 0.9 laser catheter with 45 into 6 times it was ablated, and then again a drug-eluting balloon now could be passed across the in-stent restenosis, and the patient could be, the lesion could be dilated well. So patient also had the OM and RCA, which was again attempted and done successfully. Another indication is acute stent thrombosis, where this patient presented with COVID and he had undergone successful angioplasty initially in the first admission, and then after 21 days he again presented. So this is the first angioplasty that he had gone, and we could achieve a good result, satisfactory result. In his first admission. So this was the final result after during his first admission. Then after 21 days he presented with a stent thrombosis, and again here laser was used. The stent thrombosis initially did not allow even the wire to pass, and so with just some wire insertion across the stent, we could pass the laser catheter and ablate, and then subsequently we could pass other balloons and we could open up this artery again. So probably one indication that where we have not yet tried is acute myocardial infarction with large thrombus burden, and we are yet to see that how it works well or how it works there. Otherwise, other indications we have tried and we have seen that laser catheter works very well with these indications.
Yeah, Professor Srivastava, that was a very nice exposition, and I believe your ELCA PCI will have a bright future. The main advantage being its ability of being to be delivered over a 014 wire, which puts it at an advantage over other atherectomy devices. Now, do you have any experience on cases where you need to do this ELCA before rotational atherectomy, the so-called razor cases?
Sir, rota laser cases are at our center. We still do not have rota, so I could not have an experience of that.
Right.
Once we get a rota ablator, probably we can.
And how many
rota
cases till now?
Open NC we have done laser with even rota. That open NC I had already presented here. And yeah, rota and laser, yes, because passage of rota wire and rota bar sometimes is difficult, and then laser can create a good way to track it.
Wonderful technology.
It can be the other way around. In a calcified lesion, you may find difficulty in going further with the laser.
Yeah.
Because most of the reports seen with the laser is a non-calcified lesion, heavily calcified lesion. So you can go with the rota, make passage, and then try with laser. So it can work both ways. I was asking one query out of my curiosity. The patient COVID, which had presented with stent thrombosis within a month, what was the what was the anticoagulation or antiplatelet?
Sir, the first time we were very happy with the results. So he was only on the routine ecosprin and clopidogrel for
Next
this
time, what did you
patient.
do? And next time, what did you do?
Next time, sir, we used Rivaroxaban 2.5
Along with?
along with clopidogrel and aspirin.
Okay. With a plan to change over? With a plan to change over to single antiplatelet, how long after? How long after do you like
Sir, in this case, sir, I plan to change it after 3 months. After 3 months, I'll switch over. I'll withdraw the aspirin part and I'll continue with the Ricosprin part.
Dr. Robin Chakraborty, any comment?
Just one, Smith is a great case. Only just think one comment has already been addressed, that the mechanism of laser ablator is different from rotablator and other things, which has to be understood very clearly. The other thing, in case you had a difficulty in advancing the wire and in a very complex lesion, then probably with a lot of struggle, you cross the lesion and then again gone into the artery. It may be possible that you have gone through a subintimal area, small areas of subintimal area, then gone back to the lumen. In those situations, if the operator is not aware of such difficulty and if an operator did not have a suspicion that there could be some subintimal tracking of the wire, the laser used in those situations may not be the right thing. That can cause complication. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, sir, that is true. But in peripheral, sir, where sometimes
yes, peripheral is different, of course, because that is a different thing. I'm talking about
so there, even if the wire does not cross, you can use a laser ablation. But probably you are right. In coronaries, it would be a very dicey game and would be dangerous if we ablate without crossing a wire in the true lumen.
I think we should move to the next speaker. Please, great. Mrinal, you could ask the next.
Thank you.
So Dr. Rohit is not there. Dr. Rohit Manoj has not joined. Has he joined?
He's there.
Oh, okay.
He's my teacher.
The chat box, it was not there. Okay. Then Dr. Rohit, you start your proceeding.
Yeah, thank you, chairpersons. And mine is a relatively simple case after the very high profile cases. I'll just share my experience. How did I manage SVG graft plastic? So 61-year-old gentleman, diabetic, hypertensive. He had a post-CABG in 2012. He presented to us after the recently. Just this case was done a few months back with unstable angina and echocardiography. Fortunately, his heart function was not bad. And we can see his angiography.
Dr. Rohit, could you make the full screen?
Oh, sorry, it's not full screen.
No.
Go to the show button.
Show button.
Yeah.
That one is show.
That's fine.
So you can see he already had a left system. This is the angio. Lima to LAD was patent and LAD was supplied well. The graft to OM had a significant stenosis at origin, and SVG graft was fairly large, but it was stenosis at origin, significant stenosis at origin. So after discussing with the patient, we decided to do angioplasty of both SVG and I have not shown you the RC. I will show you next. He had both SVG graft to OM and our right SVG graft to RC was uploaded. Since he had unstable angina and the Lima to LAD was patent and ejection fraction is fairly good, we offered him angioplasty and we went ahead with angioplasty. This is the routine, what would most of the people use, JR guide was, hooking was not very difficult, crossing was not very difficult, Seong Blue, and it was pre-dilated with non-compliant. Because of large vessel, I simply decided to use NC balloon with this. Then Onyx 4.5 22 mm stand was deployed. You can see the very tight narrowing here, which has been implemented well. And the different slow flow. Fortunately, with quick adenosine, he recovered fairly good craft flow was achieved, and there was no change in ECG hemodynamics. They all recovered well, and so now this is the RCA graft, which is the mid part of its stenosis, which is supplying the posterior descending artery. And so because of significant flow and because of some, you can see the haziness in part of it, I thought there is a thrombus. So I probably said that I should use a filter for production. So temporary pacemaker was put. I was a bit hesitant. Normally, I don't put a temporary pacemaker in PCI of the right coronary artery, but because of the graft and large thrombus, I thought I'll put a temporary pacemaker, and you can put the embolic protection system was put there. Then it is pre-dilated with a 2.5 milliliter balloon. The long stand was deployed, 48 mm stand to cover the whole lesion, and the two places it shows tight stenosis. Stand expansion is fairly good. And this slow flow was probably because of the filter, not necessarily because of thrombus. As soon as we received the distal filter, we achieved a quick brisk flow, and there was no heart block or no reflow was observed in this. So my learning would be, I mean, I'm not the heavy operator for the graft versus angioplasty, but do I use a filter? I'm not sure about that. I got away without using a filter in OM graft, but I ended up using a filter in right RCA graft. I'm not sure how beneficial it was. As far as the temporary pacemaker is concerned, it is an operator's choice. One should put or not. How safe is that? Because he had unstable angina, significant ECG changes, we decided to put temporary pacemaker. So I would like to thank the organizer for giving this opportunity. Thank you very much. And I will take up any comments or criticism of this case. Thank you.
Dr. Rahit.
Yes.
Yeah, very good cases you have shown. Now, I saw that you have used balloon predilatation in one of your cases. So, what is your opinion regarding the use of balloon in SVG interventions, especially after the 2.7 years follow-up data of DIVA has been presented?
I used, I mean, you can doubt that you use the balloon and then you could meet more thrombus and all this thing. But I used it because I thought the OM graph was very tight. So I was not sure the stent would pass it. That's the reason for it. Second thing is that if you observe my RCA graph, its mid part was very tight and I had to use very long stent. Its length of stent was very long. If I suppose I had to use Onyx or I had to use Biotronic stent, I probably wouldn't dilate it. I would be very happy to go with it. But if I were to use bulky, high-profile stent, I probably would dilate it. Yes.
Surprisingly, with use of balloon, it has been shown to increase the rate of stent thrombosis. So, any comment on that? What do you think can be the possible reason?
It is probably because of the degenerative materials which are responsible for.
But at 2.7 years follow-up,
venous blood in comparison to arteries, which is an atherosclerotic process.
No, the most important thing is that it is not purely thrombus in the SVG stenosis. Whenever it is tested, it has been found that the gruel material, they are responsible, and they are very notorious for making the slow flow and all once the balloon is dilated and all. So there is a chance that after the balloon inflation is done, not as a pre-dilatation, even after the post-dilatation, there is a chance that the embolization of the those degenerative materials can occur, and that is one of the causes. But pre-dilatation was not favored because of the fact that the embolization can happen, and that's why the M-guard or the guard was taken. So that was absolutely right. And the results were also very encouraging, but the slow flow is one of the important complications.
Would you routinely recommend in a venous graft angioplasty procedure distal protection device?
I don't do that. I just don't do that because but this patient RCA with about 2-3 places were stenotic, and I felt there is thrombus, although I didn't do IVUS with it. So that is why I use routinely. I don't use distal protection device in SVG graft.
Yes.
Dr. Sunandan is telling that we are late by 20 minutes. So Sunandan, should we start presenting that COVID
Thank
case?
you.
Yeah, I think COVID discussion should start.
Yeah. Raghu, can you just project those slides?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Good.
So in this session, actually,
Yeah, Mrinalda, this we have a very illustrious panel here,
myself,
including you, Professor Anjanlal Datta, Professor Robin Chakraborty, Dr. Dhiman Kahali, and Dr. Shukumar Ghosh.
Only question is time.
Yeah.
That's very late.
Very fast.
Raghu, can you share?
Hello?
Yeah. Can you share the slides?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's just
Yeah,
a
please.
just a minute.
So I think we can start. So can we start, Mrinalda?
Yes, well, you should actually, at least when the slide is there, it has been already given. COVID is a very, very important, I mean, happening in this whole century.
Next
And
slide, please,
Dr. Anjanlal Datta, our president of CSI West Bengal, he was very much enthusiastic about this particular session, and that's why this session has been kept. And this is a very important session. Dr. Debabrata Roy, you start.
We have a 65-year-old lady who is COVID-19 positive and hypertensive. She presented with chest pain of 10 hours duration. HS tropa is high. Echo is showing RCA affection of the RCA territory with 40% ejection fraction. And there's an elevation, ST elevation in lead 3 and somewhat in AVL. Next, please. So what do you think, what should be the management strategies? Professor Datta?
The management strategy, if the COVID is already positive,
yeah,
we have to
it's
first
COVID positive and MI.
Yeah, we have to first decide whether the patient, the hospital the patient has been brought is capable of having a angioplasty facilities or not. If it is there, whether there is enough logistics available to protect the staffs, nursing staff, the ward doctors and others. If that is presentable, is available, then we should go straight forward for primary PCI like non-COVID patients. This is so far as the staff and hospital part is concerned. So far as patient is concerned, these patients should have, if possible, a CT scan done, or we looked at the lung pathology. The lung pathology shows, because initially the deoxygenation may not be very high. The lung pathology shows, say, grade 15 or above ground glass opacities or pneumonic, then this patient, we should keep in mind this patient would require additional heparin dose in addition to what is normally done in PCI, primary PCI. And thirdly, we should be very much careful after discharge of the patient as to what should be the protocol so far as anticoagulant and antiplatelets are concerned. These are the three areas that we should look at. And finally, if we don't have the logistics to have separate cath lab or protection, then we can think in terms of thrombolysis, as has been one of the recommendations by the Cardiological Society of India protocol for COVID patients.
Dr. Chakraborty, Professor Chakraborty, suppose this patient is not in shock. So what will be your take? Are you going to do primary PCI, or will you opt for a pharmacoinvasive therapy?
I think if the patient is stable and asymptomatic, if there is no pain, patient is hemodynamically stable and is COVID positive, I would rather wait and sort of manage with initial pharmacological therapy, and then later on, of course, monitor patient's vitals, hemodynamics. In case we find any further deterioration, then I would consider to take the patient to cath lab, because patient is already in an environment where the patient can be taken to cath lab at any time. Otherwise, routinely for all patients, taken to cath lab may not be justifiable if they are positive for COVID.
Yeah. Dr. Dash, what is your take? Choice of intervention vis-a-vis risk of infection.
I think Dr. Chakraborty has beautifully summarized that if the patient is asymptomatic, then there is no point taking up the patient for cath intervention. The reason is we have seen in last year that even if the patient was non-COVID and the intervention was taken up, and a patient ultimately succumbed to COVID after just 2 days. So that has happened. So that's why CSI position statement categorically mentioned that within certain time we can do the pharmacoinvasive or rather pharmacological therapy, and if it does not respond, then we can go for the rescue angioplasty. Otherwise, if the patient is symptomatic and unstable, then there is no other point of withholding the intervention. You'll have to put the patient like any other patient, whether it is COVID or non-COVID. I'll show you, if time is permissible, then I'll show you a very interesting data which has been published just 1 or 2 months back, how the interventions have dramatically reduced in all the countries, during the COVID time.
Raghu, next slide, please, Raghu. Yeah, this is the whatever we have discussed. Next slide. No.
Just one point, Dr. Roy.
Yeah.
We have written in this position statement that if PCI is not feasible.
Yeah.
So that means if PCI is feasible, then PCI should be done. What is the opinion?
Actually, sir, in the position statement,
it is second position statement.
Yeah.
First position is pharmacoinvasive. This is the second statement.
Yeah.
So how do you feel? Because in US they are going for primary PCI, because we can assess the patient, and whatever we tell that pharmacoinvasive is equivalent to primary PCI, but our experience is otherwise, that not all patients, especially patients who come little delayed within 12 hours, but say at 8 hours, 9 hours, the primary PCI is a better option than the pharmacoinvasive. So in this group of patients, and if the patient has some pain if they come within 12 hours, especially. So what is your option, Devabrata?
Yeah, I can tell you there has been a very interesting paper published in Circulation Cardiovascular Intervention in 2021, though it's from a Chinese group. So if you have a confirmed COVID or presumptive COVID who is in shock, there, if you do a primary PCI, you have a 7.9% absolute decrease in mortality as compared to pharmacoinvasive therapy. But at a cost of increased infection, there is an absolute 2.3% absolute increase in rate of infection as compared to pharmacoinvasive. However, if the patient is not in shock, the primary PCI doesn't fare very vary very greatly over the pharmacoinvasive therapy. It's only absolute benefit is only 0.2%. And if you do a primary PCI in such situation, of course, the infection risk is also 0.2%. Why this more chance of infection in patients with shock? Probably they need more aerosol generating procedures like intubation and all. Maybe that's the reason. Now, what about the thrombus load? Dr. Kahali, Dr. Ghosh, you must have done acute coronary syndrome cases in patients with COVID. So it has been documented that in patients with acute coronary syndrome who is having COVID-19 infection, the thrombus load is much high, probably related, some relation with D-dimer or some relation with inflammation, namely neutrophilic activation. And they usually require thrombus aspiration, and also they require more heparin, as pointed out by Professor Dotto. So what will be your management strategy? Your
See, if the thrombus load is huge, and then in that case, you know, I think this, because Dr. Bangalore, Sripal Bangalore has shown a paper which was published in NEJM quite a few months back, 7-8 months. Though the number of patients are not very good, not very high, he has shown in this small number of patients that 46% of the patient in his, patient population had non-occlusive thrombus. I mean, there was a lot of thrombus, but the lesion was not occlusive, means less than 50% lesion. So in those patients, we can avoid the angioplasty and we can go for pharmacotherapy. And I think Dr. Soumitra Ray has also raised a very important point, which is very important also, that these patients often have myocarditis. Many patients with COVID have myocarditis. And the TROP-I is also elevated, TROP-I or TROP-T, the tests which we do initially. And their prognosis is also not good. So only angiography will be able to delineate that whether it is STEMI or NSTEMI, or it is a case of myocarditis by the coronary anatomy.
Raghu, can you show me the angio picture? Raghu? Okay, I think there is some problem with on part of the technical team. So suppose this patient has been taken out for angiography and it is showing a
it is a primary conjecture. I can tell you whether COVID disease per se can cause acute coronary obstruction, or it is a
it can. Yes. In Sripal Bangalore's and also in many other papers, it has been shown conclusively that they produce a huge amount of thrombus, and there may be erosion, because you know all of us are having erosions daily. Even today also I had 7 or 8 erosions in my coronaries, but I had no infarct because it was not substantial. So all of us are having erosions, and in a COVID patient, they get thrombus over there, and they haven't got occlusive disease, means plaques are not there, plaques are not significant. So those patients, we can avoid the plasty and all those things, and we can clear cut have a, process by which we can see that, we can treat the patient without angioplasty, because all patients they do not need angioplasty, So that's very important.
So you mean,
I think early angiography, if possible, we have a lab, but it is not a designated, designated lab for, COVID, but we do the COVID cases there. But after that, we do thorough cleaning, that is called that, and we do it for an hour fumigation, as we call it, for about an hour, and then we use it, and nothing has happened. All our people within that particular lab, we had the PPs, full PP gear with everything, all sisters, paramedical staff, and doctors. So everybody is on PP gear, and nothing happens practically.
Yeah, that
and
is
many
that,
COVID patients we have done.
that is one part of the
So
story.
this is, yeah, this
Second
is
part is
helpful
that,
because yeah. No, I'm just telling that this
No,
is
no,
helpful.
Himani, I
But
take
okay,
your-
if the patient, yeah, no, just let me finish, Anjanda. If the patient is stable, then of course we can wait, we can thrombolize and we can do whatever. But that way, if the patient has myocarditis, we'll thrombolize some of the patients. Because TROP-I is positive, patient having chest pain, dyspnea, patient has ST elevation, and we can falsely think about STEMI. So I think a lot of patients with COVID has myocarditis.
Oh, you are not
No, that is true, and you are right, and Soumitra is also right that all these patients should have coronary angiography done to get the exact picture of what is there. And secondly, if your cath lab, or for that matter, if there is logistics available to protect our staff, then we should go for the cath lab without any hesitations to go for the invasive procedures. And it is also true that if the thrombus load is very high, it is better that we do thrombosuction, give enough anticoagulant and leave it as such, rather than trying to put a stent and take the risk of stent thrombosis anytime in the coming 3-4 days or 3-4 weeks.
Yeah.
So suppose this patient has been taken up for angiogram and it has been shown that RC is the infarct-related artery, and you have done the next slide, please. You have done the angioplasty. Now, what will be your choice of antiplatelet therapy? Professor Datta, what will be your choice of antiplatelet therapy?
That is exactly what is, we are at the crossroad at this juncture.
Yeah.
If the patient is COVID positive, we should have dual antiplatelet, no doubt about it. And along with that, we may require a NOAC, as you have seen in Pioneer AF trial. How long these three should continue, which one to be taken off, and when, these are something which is not very clear at this moment. But as common sense suggests, that these patients should preferably get dual antiplatelet. One of them should preferably be ticagrelor, aspirin, plus one of the NOACs. Whether it is to be for 1 month or 7 days or 3 months will depend on the patient's individual characterization of the patient.
Dr. Chakraborty, or Dr. Das, any comment?
Yeah, actually,
can you go to slide number 30?
had huge interest in the NOACs in the setup of COVID patient with the acute myocardial infarction, but somehow or other, NOACs did not show any benefit whatsoever in acute myocardial infarction management. That is as per the latest literatures. But what has been found that heparin definitely gives benefit if it is used for, say, 7 days or 2 weeks or so. Heparin has got a benefit.
Heparin will be there. Antiplatelet, I'm talking about the antiplatelet.
Antiplatelet agent, if you use the anticoagulant, then definitely you cannot use, you should not use rather prasugrel and a higher P12I2 inhibitor like ticagrelor and all. And then clopidogrel aspirin should be combined. And as you have already suggested, that it should be tailored, say after 1 month or so, and to just a single agent or SAPT plus anticoagulation.
No, Minal, would you like Brilinta or would you like Plavix? That's the question. What would you like?
I would like the Plavix. The reason is I am going to use the anticoagulation, so naturally I won't take the risk of bleeding.
What is your?
Yeah, I'm just going to show you an interesting data. Raghu, can you please proceed with the slides?
Yes, sir.
Go to the next slide number 13, straight away.
Right. Okay. Sure, go to slide number 13.
Actually, there is always a delay. If somebody,
okay, let me tell you. So this is a very,
go to slide number 13.
Very nice paper, again published in Circulation 2020 on antiplatelet therapy after PCI. What they're saying that it is always good that you start the patient on antiplatelet whether he is having PCI or not, because they are going to reduce intravascular fibrin and thrombus formation. Ticagrelor is probably the preferred agent because they have some additional effect on inhibiting the extracellular nitrous transport protein 1, which reduces the uptake of adenosine, and this actually confers extra anti-inflammatory properties. However, ticagrelor should be avoided in patients who are using these antivirals, lopinavir or ritonavir. And thrombocytopenia, which might result either from prolonged use of heparin or because of consumptive coagulopathy, should be monitored very closely because they are associated with increased risk of infection and increased risk of ARDS. This is because of the loss of ability of the patient to deposit fibrinogen and seal the damaged pulmonary vasculature. Till now, as has been shown in the current literature, in all the risk categories, be it low, intermediate, or high risk, the patients may be maintained for 3 months on DAPT, and then he can be continued on monotherapy, preferably with ticagrelor. But in certain cases where the patients are receiving lopinavir, ritonavir, as per the Brazilian Cardiac Society consensus statement, they might be started on prasugrel. And if the patient needs NOACs, so this is my last question. If the patient needs NOACs, either due to
just Devabrata, I just want to intervene that prasugrel plus NOACs, the bleeding risk will go up high, whatever Brazilian society tells.
I'm not telling about combining prasugrel with NOACs. My question
because what you told is absolutely correct,
patient,
and about the selection of the stents also, we should prefer jotarolimaz eluting stent. Of course, there is some studies with giants, but I think Onyx one is a bigger study. And we can go for jotarolimaz eluting stent so that we can off the single antiplatelet. And I totally support what you have told, that for 3 months we should give DAPT and we should start with Brilinta, means ticagrelor. That is the better of the two, and it's a stronger one also, provided, because many of the COVID patients has dyspnea. If the patient is dyspnea, of course we have to give clopidogrel. But not with we would like to give some anticoagulants.
If we give
with
two
prasugrel.
antiplatelet drugs, and it is also routinely recommended that heparin, initially at the injectable form, either in the heparin or low molecular heparin, is a better drug. So, two antiplatelet and heparin is to be given routinely for all patients with stent.
That is for the first 7 days, first 7 days.
After 7 days, you have to continue.
That's normally we do like this. For first 7 days, we prescribe even enoxaparin 40 BID, not 1 milligram per kilograms.
No,
we normally give like that. But of course, if the patient is 80 kg, then we give 60 milligrams BID.
Now, Devabrata and Dhiman, there is a question. If the patient has evidence of VT, DVT, or D-dimer is very high, the patient on discharge, what should be the additional advice? If you have given enough dose of enoxaparin, heparin for 10 to 12 days as per recommendations, now the patient is going to be discharged, COVID patient, D-dimer high.
If the patient has D-dimer high, as we told that on after 7 days, we'll go to the NOACs plus strong, DAPT. And some of the patients are resistant to antiplatelets, to also enoxaparin or dalteparin, whatever we give. There are a lot of literature that COVID patients, this DVT, this is not only by all the mechanisms which we know, but there are some extra mechanisms involved where they get this, thrombogenicity, increased thrombogenicity,
inflammation,
and we can think of putting a filter even if the patient has got a lot of DVT or something. Just today in Apollo, one of my patients, known patient, not my patient, she had a very advanced COVID with lot of fibrosis. They have put a filter to prevent pulmonary embolism.
So what I want to tell you, that while treating a STEMI or acute coronary syndrome in the background of COVID, our attention should not entirely be on the coronary arteries. We should keep our attention on the pulmonary arteries as well.
Because the pulmonary, not only that, the pulmonary artery pressure also goes high with intense pulmonary artery, pulmonary fibrosis on both the sides. The pulmonary artery pressure also goes high. So we have to keep an eye on the pulmonary hypertension and how far the pulmonary hypertension is. And we should be very proactive to prevent the pulmonary embolism,
If you read
Yeah.
If you read the
Because
first
of the
point of
feeder.
this slide, it's very interesting. In the early phase of infection, platelet inhibition may reduce intravascular fibrin and thrombus formation, thereby preventing ensuing consequences. That means because there is no fibrin, there will be more fluid collected into the alveoli and there will be more pulmonary edema. That is what they want to mean.
But they have not mentioned about that.
I read it somewhere like this.
No, but they have not mentioned about it.
One issue is the
You know,
D-dimer
Anjanda,
sometimes
because
just like a
Anjanda,
floppy.
there have been lot of literature and lot of personal communications from Royal Brampton Hospital and others where they have told after autopsy they have found there is extensive fibrosis, thrombosis in the pulmonary arterioles and the pulmonary artery.
Absolutely
Yeah.
true.
So it is, you know, if we can prevent the thrombus formation, we are done, you know. It's simple. So even if there is alveolar dilatation, put the patient on ventilator for a few days and, you know, you give positive pressure, you know, with PEEP high and you get the patient out of it after a few days.
Debu, may I share 2 slides?
Yeah,
Please.
Related to COVID.
We will be very interested to see, Mrinal.
Yeah. Can you see the slide?
No, not really. Shukumar, would you like to add antiplatelets initially in the COVID patients along with some anticoagulant, even single antiplatelet? Let aside STEMI situation.
No, without
chest pain and, you know, chest pain.
It is recommended just in the COVID treatment. It will be along with heparin or unfractionated heparin. Don't get low dose, have to use a mild to moderate cases.
But regarding antiplatelet, even a single agent?
No, antiplatelet.
Can you see the slide?
Yeah, we can see. Yeah, we can see. We can
This
see.
is the statistics actually which I was talking about, that there has been significant reduction in the even the diagnostic testing volume during the COVID-19.
Go to the slideshow. Go to slideshow, Mrinal.
Slideshow, no? Okay.
Yeah, we can see it. We can see it. But Mrinal, one thing to point out that it's very early part of the COVID, you know, March and April 2020.
But this
doesn't show the trend, you know. If you can show something this year, say March, April 2021.
This year it will be published somewhat later. This is number 1. And what we are talking about is very interesting thing, that there is a condition which has been labeled as a long COVID syndrome. As you were discussing, that a fibrotic element is there during the, you know, what is called in the lung. Even in the heart itself, there can be fibrotic procedure because of various factors, stimulation or overstimulation of the various factors. And also there are elements of endothelial dysfunction which can actually result in you know, the problems of myocarditis being continued, or the features of heart failure may continue, and that creates a problem. And that is why possibly the long-term treatment with you know, the anti-failure agents and anticoagulants, along with the dual antiplatelet or single antiplatelet agents, should be continued. So that is
because you know, Mrinal, I absolutely agree with you. And there is paucity of prescription of antiplatelet agent, even where it demands in the COVID treated patient. All of them give, you know, clicks and enoxaparin 40 OD like that. But I think it should be 40 BID, and we should start some antiplatelet agent like clopidogrel very, you know, early. Another thing to tell what you have told, just 1 minute, that even the bad news is from a Israeli report, which is a very authentic Israeli report from their internal communication among the medical fraternity, that Pfizer vaccine is causing myocarditis. What you mentioned about the fibrosis, that so we are not even protected by the vaccines. We don't know about the outcomes of this vaccine in our society. And just to mention about a data from Germany with 100 patients and the European data with 1300 patients. In German data, 78% of the patients showed changes in the cardiac magnetic resonance imaging, and 52% in the European study have shown changes in the magnetic resonance imaging study, which were not revealed in the normal echocardiogram.
Sorry to interrupt. Thank you very much.
Sure.
For all
Thank
the
you, Debabrata.
experts for their
Beautiful
illuminating thoughts.
presentation, beautiful discussion. Thank you.